We remember them as demons of the sea, horned raiders, drunk on blood and glory. But what if I told you, most Vikings never saw battle? No silver, no longships, no conquests, just cold mornings, aching hands, and the relentless struggle to survive another day. Behind every warrior sung in the sagas was 1,000 more, farmers, wives, craftsmen, whose names were never carved into stone. Stay with me till the end, and you'll discover what real Viking life looked like. The hunger, the hope, and the haunting silence of survival. Before the raids, before the legends, there was work. Endless, back-breaking work. As dawn broke over the Northlands, smoke rose from longhouses built of timber and turf. Inside, the hearth's glow pulled families from their sleep, men to the fields, women to the fires, children to chores. The average Viking wasn't a conqueror. He was a farmer, a fisherman, a craftsman. Each day was measured not in hours, but in tasks. Feed the goats, mend the nets, chop the wood before the snow returns. Their world was small, but every day felt colossal, because every meal depended on the work of those hours. And as the sun climbed, the farmstead came alive, the sound of hammers, the bleating of sheep, the smell of smoke and soil. But this was no peaceful life, because the North always demanded its payment. What happened when the land itself turned against them? The soil of Scandinavia was thin and cruel. Only a few crops could survive. Barley, rye, oats. Every season brought the same fear. Would the harvest last through the winter? Men labored in fields from dawn till dusk using wooden plows tied to oxen. Women wove cloth, brewed ale, and smoked meat to preserve it. Even children, barely old enough to speak, carried water and gathered wood. It wasn't war that killed most Vikings. It was famine. A bad harvest meant hunger, and hunger meant death. Yet they endured. Because survival wasn't a choice, it was a creed. They believed every hardship was part of word, fate. You didn't curse it, you lived it. And when the days grew shorter and the frost came creeping across the thatch, they retreated to the only place that held warmth, the longhouse. Forget the castles and halls of kings. The Viking home was dark, smoky, and alive with noise. Animals slept inside for warmth, cows, goats, sheep. Children slept beside them, their breath mingling in the cold air. The longhouse was the heart of Viking life, part shelter, part sanctuary, part workshop. Here, women ruled. They held the household keys, symbols of authority, and decided how food, clothing, and goods were managed. Every ember in the hearth was her responsibility, every mouth to feed her burden. At night, the family gathered around the fire. They didn't speak of war or glory. They told stories of gods who walked among men and men who defied the gods. But not all stories had happy endings, because beyond the walls of the longhouse waited the harshest test of all: love, loyalty, and survival of bloodlines. To be born a Viking was to be born into duty. Love wasn't chosen, it was arranged. Marriage was a contract, not a promise of affection. A daughter could seal an alliance, a son could secure a trade. But don't mistake this for oppression. Viking women had rights unheard of in most of medieval Europe. They could inherit property, manage estates, and even divorce their husbands if mistreated. Yet life was still brutal. Childbirth was deadly. Childhood was short. Half of all Viking children never reached adulthood. Those who did learned to fight, to weave, to endure. Their games were lessons, their play, preparation. But in the North, life wasn't just toil and death. They found meaning in something deeper: belief. Belief that unseen gods watched every act and every sacrifice mattered. Faith wasn't found in temples. It lived in the home. Every Viking family made small offerings to the gods: a slice of bread to Freyr for good harvests, a sip of ale to Thor for protection. They believed the world was bound by fate, a web spun by unseen hands. You could fight your destiny, but never escape it. Runes were carved not as decoration, but as whispers of power, a way to speak with forces older than time. Death wasn't feared, it was accepted. To die with courage meant to feast in Valhalla. To die in cowardice meant to fade into nothing. Their faith gave them strength, but faith couldn't feed the hungry, so they turned to the one thing they still had: each other. In the Viking world, justice didn't come from gilded thrones or royal decrees. It came from the people, gathered beneath the open sky. They called it the Thing, a council of free men where disputes were aired, trade was struck, and alliances sealed. There were no judges robed in silk, no guards with polished spears. Only neighbors, warriors and farmers standing shoulder to shoulder, each with a voice, each with a stake in the fate of their world. Here, justice was not written. It was spoken. If you stole, you repaid double. If you killed, your kin offered blood or silver. A man's word could weigh heavier than his sword, and his reputation was his shield. Honor wasn't a virtue. It was currency. Break it, and you became a ghost among the living. In this rough democracy, the Thing was both law and theater. Heated arguments thundered like storms, accusations flew like arrows, and verdicts carried the weight of gods. Yet when the decisions were made, there was celebration, not bitterness. Feasts followed justice. Mead flowed in carved wooden cups, fires blazed against the cold, and laughter filled the timber halls. For one fleeting night, enemies became brothers again, and the harsh north seemed almost merciful. But the warmth never lasted long. The flames dimmed, the mead ran dry, and winter crept back into their bones. The songs faded into silence, a silence that reminded them peace was fragile, and justice, like fire, had to be tended, or it would die. And soon, as snow began to fall again, the Viking world turned once more toward the long night that waited beyond the hall doors. When winter came to the Viking world, life itself seemed to pause. The fields froze. The sea, once a restless highway of trade and plunder, turned into a grave of ice and mist. The sun vanished early, and the wind howled like a hungry beast across the fjords. In those long months of darkness, survival meant more than food or fire. It meant holding on to hope. Families gathered inside their timber halls, the smoke rising through holes in the roof, the scent of pine and stew thick in the air. Children huddled under firs as the elders began to speak, and in their voices, the world came alive again. They told of Odin, wandering the 9 realms in disguise, of Thor, whose hammer split mountains, of Freya, whose tears turned to gold as she searched for her lost love. Each story was a bridge from one generation to the next. It reminded them who they were and why they must endure. The sagas were not just entertainment. They were survival. For in the dead of winter, when storms battered the roof and wolves prowled in the distance, stories were the one thing the cold could not take. And when at last the sun returned, pale but persistent, the Vikings would step out into the thawing world once more. They had faced the long night and lived to see the dawn. And as the first shoots of green pushed through the frost, so too did their spirit, unbroken, eternal, ready to begin again. Most Vikings never set sail for glory. Their battles were quieter, with hunger, with loss, with time. But in their endurance lies their legacy. They built a world from stone and storm, and in doing so, they left something behind. Not gold or conquest, but a story of survival. So next time you hear the word Viking, remember this. Behind every legend stood someone like you. A mother, a child, a farmer. Fighting not for fame, but for life. If you felt that echo, that hunger to see beyond the myths, then don't stop here. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because next time, we're diving into the darkest betrayal in Viking history, when blood was spilled not on foreign shores, but at home. Watch the next story now and step deeper into the shadows of history.